I'm very pleased to be with you today to stand in this pulpit after such a long, long time. Thank you for the invitation, and it's so nice to be back with you all again at St. Michael's. A minister had a dream that he was preaching a sermon, and he woke up to discover that he was. Let us pray. May our worship times be hope-filled days that fill our fears with light, a time that quietens every anxious thought and prompts our heart to stop and find your peace, to trust in your grace always, and to live upon the truth that you give. Amen. A young couple moves into a new neighborhood. In fact, they're so madly keen to get into the new home that they actually move in before the house is completely finished. The next morning, on their lovely glassed-in veranda, while they're sitting eating their breakfast and drinking their cups of tea, the young woman looks over the back fence and sees her neighbor hanging out her washing on the clothesline. That laundry wash, she exclaimed to her husband. What an absolute disgrace. That woman doesn't know how to wash correctly. Perhaps she needs a better laundry soap. Her husband looked on, but remained silent. Every time her neighbor would hang her washing out to dry, the young woman would make the same critical comments. Needs to learn how to wash. Needs a better washing powder. Didn't her mother ever use rinser or Persil? Why doesn't she use some modern soap cleaner? That woman needs to have more pride in her washing. I would be ashamed to put my washing out to dry like that. A couple of weeks later, the woman was very surprised to see a very nice clean washing hanging on the line, bright and beautiful, clean, sparkling in the sunshine. And she said to her husband, look at that. A very nice new washing. She eventually had to learn how to wash correctly. I wonder who taught her that. Her husband spoke up and said, actually, I got up very early this morning and I washed and cleaned our back windows. And so it is with life and with situations. What we see when watching others depends on the purity of the windows through which we look. The story reminded me of Jesus and his words spoken as part of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said, "The eye is the lamp of the body." So it is important for us as people and as Christians that we not only see clearly, but that we perceive correctly. The purity of the windows through which we look is vitally important for what we see and what we perceive, and thus important for the way that we will act afterwards. If we look at life through cruel eyes, then we shall make harsh judgments upon people. The same with eyes of prejudice, or of jealousy, or of envy, of contempt, or of selfishness, of hate, or of resentment. What we see depends on the purity of the windows through which we look. Jesus said, if our eyes are sound, then our whole bodies will be full of light. Jesus had kind eyes of encouragement, kind eyes of hope, kind eyes of sensitivity and understanding, kind eyes which allowed the purity of the windows through which he looked at life to bring his light and love to those around him, and to reflect the light of God and the love of God to those around him. The purity of the windows through which Jesus looked at life can be recognized in the ways that he looked at situations and at people. Think of Bartimaeus, the blind beggar of Jericho, and the way Jesus looked at him. Did Jesus criticize him? No. Find fault with him? No. Did Jesus say, "You're a dirty, smelly beggar, lying around unemployed, cadging for a living from the passing crowds on their way to Jerusalem for Passover"? No, Jesus makes no rebuke or criticism whatsoever. Yet as Jesus passed by, Bartimaeus called out and kept on calling out until he was heard. Can you imagine the disciples scolding him and saying, "Do be quiet, Bartimaeus, and shut up calling out"? We cannot hear what Jesus is saying. Yet Jesus not only saw him and noticed him, but Jesus met his need. In the midst of all the clamoring voices, Jesus said, "Bid him come to me." Can you imagine the blind beggar stumbling and blundering his way up the grass verge beside the road, falling over and getting up again, pushing through the crowd to arrive at the feet of Jesus? Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Now that's a strange question to ask a blind beggar, isn't it? What do you want me to do for you? What if Jesus said to us this morning, "What do you want me to do for you?" How would you answer? Perhaps you think that's a laughable question for me to ask. But perhaps each one of us here in church today, in our own way, needs to ask the question, what do we really want to receive from God? Think of Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector of Jericho, and the way Jesus looked at him. He didn't say, "You're a thorough crook, Zacchaeus. You're a rotten traitor, working as a tax collector for the Romans, and you skim money off the top for yourself, thieving your neighbors blind and keeping them poor. You're a wicked man. You associate with all the riffraff in town. No wonder you don't get invited to parties at Jericho. No one should have anything to do with you." No, Jesus didn't take that attitude. He said, "Come down from that tree, Zacchaeus, for I am having a meal at your house tonight. Salvation has come into your house." Now, the word salvation in Greek includes the meaning of becoming whole again, becoming whole again. And Zacchaeus certainly needed to do that, to become whole. He was missing the mark of what was in him to be, as many of us still do in life today. We miss the mark of what is in us to become and what we are destined to become. What? Said the onlookers in Jericho standing in the street. What did Jesus say? "I'm going to have a meal at the house of Zacchaeus." Nothing else that Jesus could have said that day could have upset the onlookers any more than that. It seemed outrageous to folk in Jericho that a person like Zacchaeus could ever be accepted. Yet we all need to be accepted, and we all need to respond to acceptance. Perhaps we also must learn to realize that there is nothing that we can do to make God love us more. And there is nothing we can do to make God love us less. That for Christians is a fundamental fact of life. We are loved utterly. We are accepted utterly. If we believe that our lives would be lived differently, we are loved utterly. We are accepted utterly. Think of the 10 lepers and the way Jesus looked at them. Think of the woman caught in adultery. Think of the man with the unclean spirit. These stories tell us it is not only where we look in life, but how we look at life that counts, and how we look at situations, how we look at people, and how we look for things in life. how we spend so much time and energy looking at ourselves. We look for peace. We look for fulfillment. We look for life abundant with an anxiousness and a desperation. We look everywhere in life apart in the direction of Jesus, the one who can give our lives the vitality that we're looking for. But if we run to Jesus like the rich young ruler did, will we then be prepared to meet the demands that he places upon us when he says to us, "Come, follow me"? We humans often miss out on the common things of life simply because of our inattention to it as we pass through life, of business, of family, or preoccupations with other things. We almost seem to be too busy for our own good. Let me tell you another story about ways of looking and ways of perceiving and not perceiving, of how and where of looking and perceiving. Can you picture the eastern United States in the middle of winter? In the Washington, D.C. Metro railway station, on a very, very cold January morning in 2007, a young man stands in a subway tunnel playing his violin, busking as people go to work on the train and pass by him on their way to work. His little bag for the contributions lies on the ground in front of him. He played 6 pieces of music written by Johann Sebastian Bach for about 45 minutes. During that time, approximately 2,000 people went through the station, hurrying, rushing, in a mad rush of life. After 3 minutes, a middle-aged man noticed that there was a musician playing. He slowed his pace and stopped for a few seconds, then hurried on to meet his scheduled train. After 4 minutes, the violinist received his first dollar. A woman threw some money in the bag at his feet, but without stopping, continued to walk on. After 6 minutes, a young man leaned against the subway wall to listen to him. Then, looking at his watch, he hurriedly started to walk on again. After 10 minutes, a 3-year-old boy stopped, but his mother tugged him along hurriedly as the child stopped to look at the violinist. Finally, the mother pushed hard, and the child continued to walk, turning his head all the time to look back at the violinist. This action was repeated by several other children. Every parent, without exception, forced them to move on. For 45 minutes, the musician played on. Only 6 people stopped and stayed for a while. About 20 gave him money, but continued to walk on. He made the great sum of $32. After 1 hour, he finished playing and silence took over. No one noticed, no one applauded, nor was there any recognition. No one at the time knew this, but the violinist was Joshua Bell, one of the best violinists and musicians in the world. He had just played one of the most intricate pieces of violin music ever written, with a Stradivarius violin worth $3.5 million. So precious indeed, an instrument that it could not be played outside in the cold. 2 days before, Joshua Bell had completely sold out a theater for a concert in Boston, where the average seats cost $100. 3 months later, in the following April, Bell won one of the most prestigious awards for classical music that could be offered in the United States. That's a real story. Joshua Bell playing incognito in a metro station had been organized by the Washington Post newspaper as part of a social experiment about perception, taste, and people's priorities. One possible conclusion reached from this Washington Post experiment could be, if people like us do not have a moment in life to stop and listen to one of the best musicians in the world playing the finest music ever written upon one of the most beautiful instruments ever made, how many other things are we missing? What are we looking at but not perceiving in life? When I read that story, I often thought about Jesus and the people who met him and passed him day by day. In a commonplace environment of a place called Galilee, in the everyday life of hillside and lakeside, village and synagogue, the people of Israel did not recognize him when he walked and talked, taught and healed in their midst. Because they failed to do so, however, did not change who he was. Just as the failure to recognize Jesus in today's world does not change who he is either. Like folk rushing for the train in Washington, the people of Galilee and Jerusalem could not recognize the greatness and the beauty of Jesus, could not stop and reflect upon the one who stood before them. Were they too busy? Were they too preoccupied with life to stop, to notice and to listen and to recognize his identity? Here at St. Michael's, we might look at beggars or drug addicts or homeless folk in Collins and Elizabeth Streets with a glancing eye. We might read the stock market reports or our monthly bank statements with an eye for detail. But how often are we looking at life around us with eyes of faith? We are often just too busy, just too preoccupied with other things, always in a rush. We need to pause and think about the pace of our lives that cause us to do this. And we have to think, what are we missing? What are we missing? What could change in our lives if we really perceive things in faith around us? But really, when you think about it, how much more serious it is if we pass by something and miss something of greater eternal significance. There are lots of stories in the gospel about people who didn't notice life as they lived it and did not recognize the eternal significance of what they did in the day-to-day business of living. In Matthew's gospel, for example, in chapter 25, it tells of a final symbolic story, reckoning of life. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, the King separates folk to the left and to the right, as a shepherd separates his sheep from the goats. And the criteria of judgment and the basis of the selection and eternal choice depends simply upon people and how they've rated and treated others in life. Simple acts of kindness. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was naked and you clothed me. When did we do that, they say, revealing that they did such actions out of compassion and love to others, rather than for selfish reasons of self-benefit, trying to score up credit points for themselves. The king replied, inasmuch that you did it unto one of these, the least of my brothers, you did it unto me. These are the ones who are commended. And they said, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we see you naked and clothed you? And the ones who didn't notice these folk, to see their need and respond to their need, they stand are the ones who are rejected. Oh, they probably would have done something or said something had they known the eternal significance of what was about. And the same for us, isn't it? When we look at the drunk staggering by, or the homeless person in the street, do we think, inasmuch that we did it unto them, we did it unto the King? The same eyes of selfishness and self-interest are also found in the Good Samaritan story. We find them in the eyes of the priest and the Levite who passed by on the other side. They looked at the man lying in the gutter by the side of the road in the same way as the lady looked at her neck-door neighbor's washing with critical and judgmental eyes. Without the purity of the windows for which to look, they walked past. Without the eyes of love, they refused to become involved. They lacked the windows of compassion with which to help. And which of the people on the road did Jesus commend? Of course, the one who showed compassion upon the one who was attacked and robbed. Or put in the eyes of the laundry wash story, Jesus commended the Samaritan, the one, when he looked at the other lying in the gutter, possessed the purity of the windows for which to look and the compassion with which to act. We are accountable for what we pass by, for what we notice and what we do not notice, for who we notice and how we respond to those who pass. Like the folk rushing for the trains at the metro station in Washington, miss the opportunities of being in the presence of the master musician. Those who miss the opportunity of recognizing Jesus miss out on the presence of the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. We need a leap of faith to see what we're missing, to see Jesus not only for a very narrow intellectual appraisal of life with eyes of faith, because one cannot discover the identity of Jesus with a glancing eye. One cannot discover the identity of Jesus even with an eye of detail. One can only recognize the identity of Jesus with the eyes of faith. What I'm asking you to do this morning is look at other people around you with the eyes of Jesus. Look at life with the eyes of faith. When you look at others, what do you say? Do you ask, are they coping? Are they just putting on a brave face? People sitting in the pews around you, are they hurting inside? Are they lonely or confused or feeling ignored? Do we look with eyes of faith what troubles they are facing? Do such people need our smile? Yes. Do they need our conversation? Yes. Do they need our attention? Yes. I believe that when we look and act with eyes of faith, we make a difference to these people. We need to have kind eyes of encouragement, kind eyes of hope, kind eyes of sensitivity and understanding, with eyes of love and compassion and grace, and to act upon it. We say that St. Michael's is a vital church, but it's up to us, isn't it?